Have you ever found yourself haunted by someone's presence long after the relationship ended, the conversation closed, or the moment passed? You wake up, and there they are in your thoughts. You go about your day, and something small, a scent, a phrase, a face in the crowd, pulls you back to them. Rationally, you know it's over. Emotionally, it's as if their echo has made a home inside you. Why does this happen? Why do certain people, often the ones we don't want to think about, refuse to leave our minds? Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What if this haunting isn't just a fluke of memory or emotion? What if it's the unconscious trying to tell you something, something vital about your wounds, your longing, your unlived life? This isn't just about lost lovers or estranged friends. It's about projection and about shadow, about the way we carry parts of ourselves in the images of others. It's about memory, identity, meaning, and how someone can become a symbol, even an obsession, precisely because they reveal something we haven't yet dared to face. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this kind of internal tension the sickness unto death, the despair of not being fully oneself, while not fully knowing why. Freud saw it as the return of the repressed, but Jung, perhaps more than anyone, showed us that when someone is always on your mind, it's rarely about them, it's about you and the pieces of you that are trying to speak. In this video, we're going to explore this strange, intimate phenomenon through 6 insights, each one peeling back a layer of why someone might live in your thoughts long after they've left your life. We'll journey through Jung's theory of the anima and animus shadow work, projection, unresolved trauma, archetypes, and the soul's deep longing for wholeness. Because this isn't just about forgetting, it's about becoming. There's a strange kind of ache that comes with obsessive thoughts. A face keeps returning in your mind, not out of desire, necessarily, but something deeper. It feels involuntary, like your psyche has bookmarked a person and keeps flipping back to that page. No matter how far you try to read ahead, you tell yourself you're over them, that you've moved on, but there they are again, in a dream or in the background of your thoughts as you pour coffee, or in that quiet moment when the distractions fall away and you're left alone with your mind. Why does this happen? Carl Jung believed that we often mistake outer relationships for inner symbols. What we're drawn to or obsessed by in other people is frequently something we've disowned in ourselves. He called this the process of projection. Projection is the unconscious act of assigning our own qualities, especially the ones we don't recognize or accept, onto others. We look at someone and believe we're seeing them clearly, but often we're seeing a reflection of our own unfinished emotional life. You don't just miss them, you miss who you felt you could be around them, or who you thought they were, or who you hoped they'd become. But all of that lives inside you. Your longing is less about the other person and more about your psyche trying to integrate a missing piece of itself. Think about it. Have you ever been magnetically drawn to someone who made no logical sense, someone who didn't align with your values or life path, but still occupied your thoughts like a song you couldn't stop humming? Jung would say this isn't an accident. It's your unconscious using another person as a symbol, a placeholder for something unacknowledged in yourself. Sometimes, the person you can't stop thinking about holds the traits you've buried. Maybe they're bold, and you've been too cautious. Maybe they're emotionally unavailable and you've been conditioned to chase love. Maybe they're creative, passionate, alive, and something in you longs to wake up. But it's not about them. It's about the part of you that comes alive when you think of them, or more precisely, the part that aches to be integrated. Projection is a psychological sleight of hand. It makes us believe we're reacting to the outer world when in truth we're responding to the inner world wearing someone else's face. This doesn't mean the relationship wasn't real or that their impact wasn't profound, but if someone continues to live rent-free in your mind long after they've exited your life, it's likely that the work isn't finished, not with them, but with what they represent. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That includes obsession, that includes longing, that includes the invisible thread that ties your thoughts to someone who may not even be thinking of you." So the question is that, why can I stop thinking about them? It's what part of me is trying to speak through the image of this person. Sit with that. Let their presence in your mind become a mirror, not a trap, because once you see the projection for what it is, something powerful happens. You start reclaiming the energy you gave away. You stop searching outside for what must be healed inside. And slowly, the person begins to fade, not because they were insignificant, but because you finally heard what your soul was trying to say. There's a haunting kind of attraction we sometimes feel toward people who awaken something dormant in us. It's not just desire or affection or nostalgia, it's something deeper, like a glimpse into a parallel version of ourselves, a self we never got to become. Jung believed that within every person lies a psychic image of the other, an unconscious ideal that symbolizes the lost, repressed, or unexplored sides of ourselves. These inner figures don't just represent gender, they symbolize the deeper emotional and intuitive energies we've disowned in the process of becoming socially acceptable, responsible adults. When you can't stop thinking about someone, Jung would ask, what did they awaken in you? What life force did they carry that you didn't feel permitted to claim for yourself? Maybe they were spontaneous when you've always been careful. Maybe they embodied a kind of sensuality, wildness, or freedom that you were taught to suppress. Maybe they made you feel deeply seen or dangerously alive. That impact lingers, not because you're meant to be with them, but because they ignited the fire of your unlived life. This is why we often become fixated on people who are ultimately unavailable. They aren't here to be possessed, they're here to be integrated. The goal isn't to chase them, it's to reclaim the part of you they awaken. This is where the psyche works, like myth. In ancient stories, the hero often meets a mysterious figure, a guide, a temptress, a shadowy teacher, who leads them off the familiar path. That figure is rarely meant to stay. They are symbolic. Their role is to awaken the hero to the deeper journey they must undertake. In your life, that figure may have appeared as a lover, a crush, a friend, or even a stranger you barely knew but couldn't stop thinking about. Their purpose was never to complete you. It was to reveal you. Psychologist James Hollis puts it beautifully. The goal of relationships is not happiness, but transformation. And often transformation begins when we meet someone who carries a flame we forgot we were allowed to hold. Here's the trap, though. We confuse the symbol with the source. We try to go back to the person, thinking they hold the key. But the truth is more humbling and more empowering. It was never about them. It was about what your soul recognized in them, the invitation to become more whole, more alive, more you. Kierkegaard once wrote that despair is not being willing to be oneself, and often the people who haunt our minds are the ones who briefly showed us a version of ourselves we didn't yet have the courage to claim. Their absence isn't just about loss, it's a summons. So if someone won't leave your thoughts, ask yourself, what did I see in them that I've been afraid to become? What parts of me did they reflect? Not because they were mine to have, but because they were mine to wake up. And what would it look like today to honor the unlived life they stirred in me, not by running after them, but by walking more fully into myself? If this resonates with you, if you've ever wrestled with the feeling of being haunted by someone who stirred something deep in your soul, you're not alone. These are the kinds of questions we explore here every week. So if you'd like to walk this path with others who feel the same, consider subscribing. There's a peculiar heaviness that comes with some attachments. You know the relationship wasn't healthy. You know it wasn't nourishing. And yet, something in you clings. The memories loop, the fantasy lingers. The mind keeps circling back as if it's waiting for something to finally resolve. This is where things get complicated, because not all obsession is about love. Sometimes it's about pain that never found its closure. Sigmund Freud called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate and relive unresolved emotional wounds. We don't just remember the past, we try to redo it. Subconsciously, we look for people who resemble the emotional patterns of our childhood, especially the ones that hurt. You aren't held? You may become drawn to emotionally unavailable people. You were shamed? You may gravitate toward those who withhold approval. You felt invisible? You might chase those who keep you guessing just for a glimpse of being seen. And when that person finally gives you a flicker of warmth, it feels euphoric. But it's not because it's love, it's because it's familiar. The child in you is still trying to win the love that once felt out of reach. Carl Jung took this further with his concept of the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that holds all we've rejected, feared, or failed to integrate. When someone triggers a powerful emotional reaction, when they haunt your thoughts and stir both longing and pain, it's likely they've touched your shadow. They may not be your soulmate. They may be your mirror, a mirror for unresolved grief, for unmet needs, for the version of yourself that's still waiting to be healed. This is why no contact sometimes doesn't work, not in the deepest sense. You cut the person off externally, but the pain persists internally because the real attachment isn't to them, it's to the unfinished story you're still trying to rewrite. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "Mostly it is loss which teaches us about the worth of things. But sometimes what we think is loss is actually repetition, not of what we had, but of what we never got." The good news? There sets a path out, but it begins with a shift in question. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" we ask, "Why did this pattern feel so magnetic? What story was I trying, again, to resolve through them?" And when we dare to answer that question honestly, something profound happens. We stop viewing ourselves as powerless victims of love and start seeing ourselves as participants in a deeper healing journey. The wound didn't begin with them, but it surfaced with them, so it can now be faced without them. This is the hard part. You may never get closure from the person, but you can give yourself something better: clarity. Clarity that you were not broken for being drawn to someone who couldn't love you well. Clarity that your obsession was not weakness, it was a signal. Clarity that healing doesn't set come from forcing the relationship to work. It comes from finally turning inward and tending to the child within you who kept chasing pain, hoping it would one day turn into love. So the next time that person appears in your thoughts, try this. Downstead chase. Downstead resist. Just ask, what pain is this image carrying for me? And what am I ready to heal that I once thought only they could fix? That you'll find, slowly, gently, that your attachment begins to loosen, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped confusing pain with destiny. There's a kind of return that feels almost spiritual. You've tried to move on, you've journaled, meditated, deleted the photos, blocked the number, but still, something loops back, not in a desperate or dramatic way, but with quiet persistence, a name, a memory, a possibility that never came to be. The modern mind tends to pathologize this. It must be trauma, attachment issues, an unresolved psychological wound, and often that's true, but not always. Sometimes, the person who lingers in your thoughts isn't just a trigger, they're a symbol of meaning, of purpose, of a deeper story the soul is still trying to complete. Søren Kierkegaard called this kind of inner restlessness the dizziness of freedom, the awareness that life offers us infinite paths, and the quiet terror that maybe we didn't choose the one that was most true to us. And so, the person we can't forget becomes the face of the path not taken. They stand in for a version of us that might have existed, a life that might have unfolded, and more than anything, a feeling that perhaps we didn't fully allow ourselves to feel. This isn't about fantasy, it's about incompletion. Existentialists like Camus and Viktor Frankl remind us that humans are meaning making creatures. We can survive loss, failure, even suffering as long as we can make sense of it. But what we can't seem to let go of is unmeaningful pain, the kind that didn't teach, didn't transform, didn't resolve. That's what haunts us, not the person, but the unfinished narrative, the what ifs. The I wasn't set ready. The didn't stet know who I was yet. The if only I had seen more clearly. Jung called this the work of the self, the deeper intelligence of the psyche that seeks wholeness through symbolic experiences. When someone is always on your mind, it may be because the self is trying to guide you, not back to that person, but forward into the meaning they represent. They are not the destination. They are the messenger, and until we receive the message, the mind will keep returning like a soul knocking on its own door. This is why some obsessions can't be therapied away or distracted out of existence. They must be listened to. They carry the voice of something essential, a truth we weren't yet ready to hear when it first arrived. So instead of asking, why can said I stop thinking about them? Ask, what story in me is still unfinished? What meaning is still waiting to be made? What decision, desire, or dream did this person activate that I haven't yet dared to live out? The philosopher Rilke wrote, perhaps everything terrible is in its deepest being something that needs our love. Maybe the same is true for longing. Maybe what lingers in the mind isn't a curse, but an invitation, not to go back, but to grow forward, to claim the part of your life that went unlived, and to do so now in the wake of what never was. Because once you make meaning of what haunts you, it transforms. The past becomes a teacher, the longing becomes a compass, and the obsession slowly dissolves into understanding. There's a strange kind of ache that doesn't come from what happened, but from what never did. You didn't date them, you didn't confess, you didn't go deeper. Maybe you barely even knew them, and yet they linger. They haunt, they live in your thoughts with a weight that seems wildly disproportionate to the reality. How is it possible to feel such intensity for someone who was never truly in your life? Philosophers and psychologists have a word for this idealization. When real connection is absent or incomplete, the mind often steps in and builds something even more powerful, a fantasy, an inner image, polished by longing and silence, that begins to feel more real than any actual relationship ever could. Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, believed that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the idea of ourselves reflected in their eyes. We fall in love with a mirror. Carl Jung, too, saw the danger of projection when mixed with desire. He warned that the anima and animus, the soul images we carry within, can cause us to elevate certain people into symbolic figures of salvation, not because of who they are, but because of what we've attached to them. And then there's Plato's idea of the forms, that everything in this world is just a shadow of its ideal. Sometimes a person becomes that shadow, not loved for their humanity, but worshipped for the perfection we imagined in them. This is the paradox. The people who occupy the most space in our minds were often the ones we knew the least, or rather the ones we filled in the most. They didn't disappoint us because we never saw their full humanity. They never let us down because we never really let them in. They remain frozen in time, untainted by reality, preserved by absence. That sets the power of the unconsummated. As long as the fantasy stays untested, it can remain perfect, and so we return to it, not because it's true, but because it's safe. It offers beauty without mess, intimacy without vulnerability, love without risk. But it sets also a trap, because the fantasy isn't about them. It's about the you that never got to be, the version of you who might have been bold enough to speak, open enough to try, free enough to love, if only things had been different. And so the real grief isn't set about the person. It's about the version of yourself that didn't get lived, which makes this not a story of romance, but of mourning. Mourning the path not taken, the connection that never was, the words never said. But here's the truth. You can move on from a fantasy by analyzing it. You move on by seeing it clearly and then choosing something real, not perfect, not symbolic, not cinematic, human. The invitation here isn't to abandon hope, it's to abandon illusion, to trade the polished mirror for the imperfect, unpredictable, deeply sacred mess of actual life. So if someone lives in your mind, ask yourself, do I miss them, or the version of me I imagined around them? Do I know them, or did I construct them? What am I really longing for, and can I find it in reality instead of memory? Because when you let go of the fantasy, you make space for the possible. You begin to live in the present. And the person who once haunted your mind becomes a symbol, not of what you lost, but of what you're finally ready to live. We are taught that healing means letting go, deleting the number, throwing away the letters, moving on. But what if true healing isn't about forgetting? It's about remembering differently. The people who stay in our minds long after they've left our lives, they mark something, not just a relationship, not just a heartbreak, but a chapter of who we were or weren't yet when we knew them. And unless we face that version of ourselves with compassion, the memory never truly softens. It simply goes underground, where it continues to shape us in silence. Carl Jung believed that wholeness doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from integrating it, bringing what was unconscious into consciousness. Only then can the energy we've trapped in memories begin to return to us. This is the quiet revolution of inner work, not erasing someone from your life story, but rewriting the way they live in your mind, not as the one who broke you, but as the one who showed you where you were not yet whole. To heal is not to pretend it didn't matter. It's to let what mattered teach you who you are. And that begins by turning inward, gently, patiently, and asking, what part of me still hurts when I think of them? What did I need from that relationship that I hadn't yet learned to give myself? What truth was I avoiding back then? And what would it mean to face it now? Because behind every haunting is a message. Behind every persistent memory is a voice, not theirs, but yours, trying to be heard. I was not loved in the way I hoped. I gave too much. I abandoned myself to feel close to someone else. I didn't know I had the right to want more. These are not shameful confessions. They are sacred thresholds, thresholds into maturity, into authenticity, into self-respect. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos, the longing, the memory, the obsession, it's not something to eliminate, it's something to metabolize, to transform into clarity, into insight, into a deeper capacity to love, this time without self-abandonment. Sometimes we think we need closure from the other person, but more often we need closure from the version of ourselves who didn't yet know better. And that kind of closure doesn't come in one final conversation. It comes in 1,000 quiet moments where you choose yourself, where you notice the thought arise, and instead of spiraling, you listen, not to the fantasy, but to the wound underneath. And you say, I see you. I remember why this mattered, but I no longer need it to define me. This is the shift, when remembering no longer reopens the wound, but reveals the scar, not as damage, but as a sign of healing, of a reminder that you've grown, that you've seen yourself more clearly, that you've loved deeply and survived. Healing isn't set forgetting. Healing is remembering without collapsing. It's revisiting the memory, not with craving, but with clarity. It sets the day you wake up and realize, yes, they were a part of your story, but they are not the end of it. And from that place, something powerful emerges, a readiness to live, not for the memory, not in resistance to it, but beyond it. So, why is someone always on your mind? Not just now and then, but constantly, quietly, unshakably. We began this journey with Carl Jung's haunting suggestion. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And maybe that sets the truth beneath it all. The person who keeps returning to your thoughts, they are not fate. They are a mirror, a messenger, a doorway into your deeper self. Because when someone lingers in your mind, long after the story should have ended, it's not always about love. Sometimes it's about memory, identity, meaning, longing, and most of all, healing. Let's revisit what we have uncovered together. First, you're not thinking about them. You're thinking about a part of you. Their presence is a projection, a mirror held up to a part of yourself that you haven't yet integrated, a desire, a fear, a hunger. Second, the person you can't forget might be carrying your unlived life. They sparked a version of you hadn't yet dared to live, and that ache you feel. It's not just for them, it's for you, for the parts still waiting to be claimed. Third, some attachments aren't about love, they're about unfinished pain. What you're drawn to may not be romantic, it may be trauma in disguise. Your mind isn't trying to relive love, it's trying to complete a wound. Fourth, the mind returns to what the soul isn't finished with. Not every obsession is pathology. Sometimes it's the psyche trying to finish a sentence you never got to speak or live. Fifth, sometimes they stay in your mind because they were never truly in your life. You may be clinging to an idea, a fantasy, not a person. And that fantasy, it says more about your dreams than it does about reality. Sixth, healing isn't forgetting, it's facing the part of you that remembers. Closure doesn't come from erasure, it comes from integration, from choosing to see the memory with honesty and yourself with compassion. And now, the invitation. What would it look like if you stopped asking, "How do I get over them?" and started asking, "What is this experience trying to teach me about myself?" What if the person who haunts you isn't a mistake, but a mirror? Not the end of your story, but the beginning of your becoming. You don't need to stop thinking about them today. You only need to start listening to the you who appears when you do, the one who loved, the one who lost, the one who still longs, and the one now who gets to choose differently. Because you stare not broken for remembering. You are only being asked to remember with wisdom, and that changes everything. If this resonated, you're not alone. These are the questions we explore every week, gently, honestly, and with depth. If you'd like to keep walking this path with us, subscribe, share your reflections, and more than anything, keep listening to your own unfolding. The answers live there,